Well, thank you everybody for showing up. We have about 15, 20 minutes, give or take, and then we will have some time for questions. So hopefully some of you get inspired by some of the things we'll talk about and want to share some of the things that you're going through, and we can just have an open dialogue. So let's get into it.
Well, it's great to be here. My name's Rich Nanda. I'm a partner at Deloitte, where I run our strategy and analytics business. I'm also a practitioner at the intersection of strategy and analytics. I've worked for many global CPG clients over the years, and almost always helping them with issues around growth and efficiency of their growth using digital technologies like AI and data.
Awesome. And my name's Mike Segala. I used to be the CEO of a company called SFL Scientific that we were recently acquired by Deloitte, and we'll talk about that in a little later. Now I'm the principal that leads the SFL business within Deloitte. As a bit of a background, I came out of the world, I was a particle physicist back in about 2010, 2012, started my AI career, really at the beginning of the space of truly commercialization of AI coming out of academia and now into the industry space. At SFL, we were an AI consulting company, so what we were working on and what we want to talk about today is really geared towards, we've had the experience of working with all sorts of shapes and sizes of organizations, literally from one or two people sitting in their basement, watching them develop products and services that they eventually brought to an IPO, to Series A, B, C, D client or organizations, to large Fortune 500s. And every single one of them, regardless of the shape, the size, the industry that they came from, the biggest barrier that we have seen repeatedly across hundreds of these companies and now is really, how do you really bridge the gap in the overall understanding and communication from folks like myself, who is a foundational technologist running AI projects, thinking about innovation? How do I go and talk to Rich and say, hey, Rich, I got this great idea. Let's go do something innovative. And Rich says, well, do we really want to do that? We want to drive revenue. We want to think about outcomes. So this kind of barrier of what we see in the industry is probably, in my mind, the largest gap that we really have to face. It isn't the technology, isn't the algorithms, isn't the data, it's nothing. It is the relationship difference that folks like myself and folks like Rich have that we need to bridge together and start having dialogues that move the needle to actually getting to outcomes. So that's what we want to talk about today very quickly. You could spend a lot of time on these topics, and we're going to just give you a little bit of the thoughts of what we see with our customers, how we're thinking about it, and hopefully it'll spark some interest with you all.
Great. Well, look, this idea that business and technology need to come together to create significant outcomes, this isn't a new challenge or opportunity in the economy. What's new and different now, though, is the kinds of technologies that we're talking about, particularly and especially with AI, they aren't just enabling the business, making the back office more efficient. Sure, they can do those things, but this is fundamentally changing how companies compete, how they connect with their customers, what kind of relationships they can create with their customers, how their products and services differentiate. And when that happens, the domain of technology, the domain of the scientists, comes right into the middle of what the C-suite is trying to do. And the stakes are higher, and that's what's different. The stakes are higher, and so the connection between the two sides has to be hand in glove. And so as a business-centered leader, you take a look at this show, you take a look at the logos on this page, and the whole thing can be pretty darn intimidating to figure out. What you know is, I'm hearing a lot about the real-world applications of AI from my teams. I'm seeing peer companies and competitors do really interesting things around intelligence and how they're enriching how they compete. But I see this landscape, and I don't know where to start. I don't know how to get my team organized around it. And that can be very intimidating, but what it can't be is it can't be stunting, right? You can't let it stop you. And so you need guys like Mike to help you navigate and talk to you in the right terms so you don't become the odd couple.
So for me, I don't know about a lot of you, I'm assuming a lot of you are practitioners. Like, to me, this is very exciting, but this is a blessing and a curse. right? Like, let's be honest with ourselves. The problems that we want to solve on an AI perspective today, it is most likely only a couple months ago, you might not have been able to solve those problems, let alone a year or two ago. And you see that, right? Who saw Chat GPT come out last week, right? Is anybody else as amazed as I am? I mean, if you look at the results there, I think it's a foundational shift in the way that we'll start thinking about using algorithms like that to just completely embed in and make obsolete many of the services that we've had today, right? Like, to me, that's almost the equivalent of what Google did from a search perspective for early day internet, right? We have a long way to go. You need to make money about it. I get all the caveats, the nonsense, but it's foundationally changes the way that I think a lot of business will think about in the next year or two. So that happened last week. Now let's imagine that I'm a product manager and I wanted to go build a project that I've been working on for the last year or two. Am I going to go to Rich and say, hey, man, you've just sunk a couple $1,000,000 into this thing? OpenAI put out some really cool stuff. I want to change our entire product landscape. Like, that's not appropriate, right? So the pace of innovation that we have here, access to data sources, infrastructure, GPU, CPU, TPU, FPGA, access to algorithms that are now proliferated in the open source community, that is a blessing to us on the innovation side. But to folks like Rich, it really is just nothing but nonstop heartache and risk. Because what does Rich need to do? Rich needs to build products and bring services to customers that they are going to pay him for and not call up that they're mad about it, right? Like, his job is to deliver excellence to his customer. My job is to think and be scientifically minded and innovate. When you have this pace moving very, very quickly, those two things are absolutely opposing. So you have to find a fundamental middle ground such that you are developing, but keeping a lens out here. So how do you think about doing that? And that's what we'll talk about next for a second. So what we're going to get into is kind of the 4 things that we think about, just kind of really, really high-level things about how do we start bridging the gap between the expectations and the needs. Needs could be tangible needs. I need GPUs. I need CPUs. In the emotional needs, I need to work on cool projects. I need to show revenue. Between folks like myself and you guys mostly, right? The practitioners, the folks deep in the weeds, and Rich and other folks like yourselves as well, who are posed to think about the fundamental problem of building a business and building revenue. Because we normally don't talk to each other. We don't speak the same language. We speak very, very differently to each other. And that's going to be the biggest gap that we need to think about filling.
I think the one ad I would have as we just transition to the 4 places we'd suggest you start is we're also at a peculiar moment in time where not only do our business leaders have to have a practicality around growth, but the efficiency of growth now, do more with less, be more careful with risk, right? We're going to be in a period of at least a year or two, right, where we're just going to have to be more efficient around how we grow. And so the degrees of freedom are tighter, which means the coordination between the technologists and the scientists and the business has to be even better. All right, so what we're going to talk about for the next little bit and give you some examples about are 4 places we'd suggest that every team, every one of these cross-functional teams has alignment and focus. So the first is, where do you start? And have some practical framing for why you choose where you start. That balances building capability with creating impact. Related to that, what's the right way to measure, create horizons around success? And when we're achieving success, how do we talk about that progress in a way that keeps the alignment tight, keeps the investment going, right, and keeps the impact accelerating? And then lastly, you can have business managers, product owners, you can have the data scientists, but what role does the technology organization have to play in making sure things scale and sustain over time? And how to bring all 3 legs of the stool together on the journey.
So where do we start? I've worked on probably well over 1,000 AI use cases across different clients. And regardless, at the end of the day, everybody asks that same fundamental question. Like, where do we start? How do we choose what to work with? So we've kind of thought about this in a way that, again, this is abstract and high level, but if you are in the practice here of thinking about how do you build an AI practice or how do you manage it, These are the ways that I think about selecting and building a portfolio of offerings from a use case perspective. So if you look at this graph, right, I think we're all probably familiar with AI stuff, so a graph shouldn't be too bad. On the y-axis, we have near-term ROI, right? I need money now, okay? Higher up, I need money quicker. Lower down, I got a little more tolerance. On the x-axis, we have transformation. There's a lot of things that we see in AI that really isn't transformation. It's standard business process and things like that. That's still good. But as we get farther and farther out the curve, we get into really, really novel stuff. ChatGPT-3 would be a great example of that. So what I want to advocate for you, and I'm going to quickly go through the 4 of these, is the way I think about each one of these quadrants, if you're thinking about building your own, and then we're going to kind of think about these quadrants as we move forward. So the first is the plug and play. Be very wary of this. If a vendor calls you up and is like, listen, so-and-so, I hear you're doing really cool molecular dynamics. I got your solution. You press this button, I solve cancer for you. Be very skeptical. There's a lot that can be solved in plug and play, but if anybody is coming to you, it's going to be a highly commoditized play. So if you're thinking about building a unique offering or something bespoke, if it's that easy, every single person in the world has access to it. So
and Mike, no business leader would ever fall prey to a vendor with an easy button, right?
Okay.
Never happens?
It happens all the time. But be very careful here, right? So there's absolutely spaces for it, but if you're trying to build something unique in the offering, just be wary of that. Another thing that it doesn't allow you to do is if we want to build a real AI offering, that means we have to give our data scientists and our practitioners the opportunity to experiment, the opportunity to fail. AI has a huge failure risk, as it should be. It is a scientific process. And if you're only doing things that by definition work out of the box, you're never going to actually get to the place where you're building capabilities internally and your practitioners actually have the offering and the ability to go out and learn and do something themselves. So that's the huge trade-off here. If Rich comes to me and says, I need something short term, say, okay, but I still need to think about the longer tail space. The snake oil. The snake oil is bad, right? I can give you near-term results, and I can transform your whole business. Don't buy that one. Just run for the hills. We don't even talk about that. We get a lot of snake oil today. It's okay. We won't worry about that. So these top 2, I would say maybe 10, 15% of your total offering should probably sit in that top left. There's a lot of cool things that you can do in there, but again, it needs to be scaled. The bottom left is where you want to spend probably a good chunk of your time. These are use cases where you need to use your data assets. If somebody's just selling you something or offering you something where you don't actually need to use your data, it's probably not going to be really relevant to your exact business problem. You should be able to take some code and leverage some of even the vendors here, right? The data robots, the SageMakers, the IBMs of the world that have really good accelerators, but then use that to accelerate your workflow and still build something unique on top of it, okay? That's where your balanced portfolio is. You'll most likely have to do something on the IT space, meaning this thing shouldn't just automatically exist within your infrastructure already. That doesn't make sense. How could it? So you need to be thinking about there's a data problem, there's an algorithm problem, there's an integration problem. That all should sit in your balanced portfolio. These projects, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, give or take, in that time I should be able to tell you I have technically proven feasibility and I have a path back to ROI. If you can't tell me that in 8 weeks, you should not be doing the project yet. So that should probably make up about 80% of your portfolio. This guy here, the transformation, I would advocate strongly, unless you've been in this space for probably 2 to 3 years and have solved several use cases in this balanced portfolio, you're not yet ready to ask for the investment to do a transformational play. If I go to Rich and say, Rich, I need $3 million. I want to go solve a really interesting space. I want to do sensor fusion on geospatial imaging, map it with ad tech data, and predict Walmart stock prices. Rich should say, you're out of your mind. You're completely out of your mind because you've never actually done something down here that's proven out ROI to me. I haven't earned the right to do this yet. Now, if I delivered Rich 15 projects here and I crushed every single one of them, he should say, you know what? Go for it. You've proven a methodology. You've proven that landscape to me. Go do this, right? So you have to earn the right to move into that regime, and it usually takes organizations, sophisticated organizations, several years to build up that right. Okay. Hopefully that's a little bit of framing for you guys as you start thinking about kind of the portfolio of use cases to think about and go after.
I think as you're transitioning, Mike, the only thing I'd say is I was joking a little bit about falling prey to the vendor, but it's easy on both the practitioner and scientist side and on the business side to chase the hype, right? And so there's some grounding, some mutual conversations and grounding that have to happen to build the momentum, the capability to kind of go push the transformation agenda. It's very easy to kind of want to push into the transformation agenda too quickly.
So as I go to the next slide, I want us to remember this balanced in transformation, right? Quadrant 3, quadrant 4. So question 2, what Rich mentioned and 2 slides back was, how do we actually think about measuring success? We fall prey as technologists where I can say a whole bunch of random words and talk about R squared and MAPE scores and all this craziness and get people to be excited about it and say, no, I'm going to solve this problem and you're going to make a whole bunch of money. I think we as technologists do a really bad job of over-promising short-term ROI because we want our projects funded. That might be really nice in the short term, but in the long term, it's really going to come back to haunt us. So I want us to stop doing that. However, what I want us to really think about is not all ROI needs to come from a financial return on the actual project. There are other ways to prescribe value from an AI project that in their own right are as important as being able to say, hey, I've reduced cost, I've increased revenue, right? That's a financial ROI. Every time we do a project, we learn something. Every time we learn something, we grow capabilities. Our people get smarter. They're able to think about the longer term visions of what they're doing. So what I really want us to start thinking about from a value perspective is the difference between perceived value versus delivered value. Perceived value is the standard stuff. Hey, Rich, I just saved us $3 million because I automated half of our workforce. That's not really realistic. Derived value or delivered value is all the other intangibles and qualitative things that we learned along the way. I was able to get 5 of my people spun up in learning an entire new programming language. I understand now how to write and code into neural networks. I have 3 new eminence papers. I've published things on LinkedIn. I've attended conferences. All of these intangibles downstream will make your business more and more valuable. So when you're equating the value back up the stack, and I'm talking from my side up to Rich, all of that needs to be put in your foundational thesis statement. Otherwise, you will most likely never just be able to have this golden ROI financial metric. It really just doesn't exist today. So be very, very wary of that and think from the larger vision statement.
Keep going.
Good?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Next one I want to talk about is kind of following up on that is different ways to think about ROI, right? Just kind of a bridge from that last point of view. So I think there's 3 real ROIs that we can talk about. One is measurable ROI, meaning, like we talked about, I made more money, I reduced labor, I did something that's a proxy for doing good in my business. Most of the time, I would say 99.9% of all businesses and use cases, that's the only thing they really talk about is this measurable ROI. Unfortunately, there's only really a few use cases, maybe in the operations space, that kind of hit that. Like, how do you prescribe ROI to a really heavy R&D workload? It's incredibly hard because usually AI sits in an entire value stream. It is not just this one little nugget that you can measure and say, oh, because I wrote some really cool XGBoost algorithm or YOLO V7, I was able to do this such that it did this, such that I saved this amount of money. That usually doesn't happen in that linear fashion. So we have to think about the other types of ROIs that we have, right? Strategic ROI, which I just had talked about as well, where we're thinking about the 3 to 5 year vision that we want to go, right, from that quad 3 to quad 4. If I want to prove innovation, if I want to get there, I surely need to be able to align towards my 3 to 5 year roadmap and proven that I've gained capabilities. From the capability standpoint, it's the same thing. Right? I need a team of people that I know will be able to anchor me such that we're actually performing and delivering really results. So every time that you're thinking about prescribing ROI back up to the stack, you should not be talking about R squared or MAPE scores or RMSE. That is not what Rich and his peers need to hear. They need to understand these 3 things and how we are making meaningfully equating that in a quantitative and qualitative way and why one is important in different circumstances and how do we measure. That's going to be my biggest advice to you because if you only do the first left or if you talk about R squared, you might as well just go home, right? You're never going to get that buy-in in that larger scale investment.
And my advice to the group is, look, a really good CEO or general manager or C-suite, this idea of a system of ROI, that's not going to be a foreign or a concept they're going to reject. Like, that's going to resonate quite well. But it's incumbent upon the practitioners that are initiating these projects to present them with the story of the system of ROI, and that's going around this wheel from the hard and the soft ROI and how those two have to work together, as well as the prior concept on the short term and the long term, and showing how the build comes. And perhaps in the short term, there is going to be more strategic and capability ROI, but what are the indicators to show those things are happening, such that we know in 2 or 3 quarters the financial and measurable ROI comes into place. So be very forthright and proactive in talking about this system of ROI that has all 3 dimensions and how they should deliver over time as a concert.
All right, last leg here. I think we as a community haven't paid, and we as I mean AI practitioners, and I put myself squarely in here, we haven't paid enough attention to how do we not just go and ask for permission to the line of business, but how from day 0, how do we start really thinking about this, again, I'll use the word valley of death, moving from POC to production to actual ROI. Most of that hinders on IT. And it doesn't hinder on IT in a negative way. It hinders on IT because IT is foundationally set to make sure that the business runs and risks are reduced. The issue with IT in comparison to AI is IT is highly deterministic, right? You have some servers, you have some security protocols, you have your cybersecurity. There is a very fixed way that that needs to run to make sure that your business, I'm sure a lot of your Fortune 500 businesses here, doesn't implode and we don't have a leak and all sorts of other things like that. AI is the exact opposite. It's probabilistic. I think a lot of you understand that and know what that means. The implications of a probabilistic model or data in a highly deterministic IT stack, I'm sure a lot of you have experienced why that becomes very, very hard if you just finish your cool little POC you wrote, threw it over the wall to your IT friends and say, oh, go run this thing. It'll never work, right? So 80, 90% of POCs fail. Why do they fail? They don't fail because the data's not good and the algorithms aren't good and the people aren't good and the business isn't good. They fail because we do not early enough equate everybody in from a stakeholder perspective that needs to be there to make it successful. So if we, Rich and I, aren't then also bringing in our third person, which we should have up here, which is kind of the IT representation, we will never cross this chasm of actually moving from a POC to a real ROI-driven kind of AI workload. That's my last big piece of advice for everybody.
Yeah, and the other thing we all need to recognize is IT and IT executives and teams, they've been on this 30-year journey of building relevance and credibility with the business. And it's pretty good now. It's as healthy as it's ever been. And so how can that team and that capability be an ally to getting great AI done in an organization at scale in a sustainable way? And so bringing the 3 legs of the stool together early and often really is essential to make that happen. All right, so look, we've been on our own journey. Mike described that he joined the Deloitte team along with our other SFL Scientific colleagues about 2 months ago now. Deloitte you could think of as we were in that lower left quadrant, 90,000 consultants doing a lot of really interesting things, helping our clients build capability around data analytics and AI. And bringing in a firm like SFL Scientific allows us to push the envelope of what we do, bring in more of that transformational science-based innovation into the team. And over the pre-close months we were together and since we've closed, we've been taking our own advice. So we thought maybe we'd close with how we've dealt with those 4 same pieces of advice that we gave you all.
Awesome. Yeah. So it should look very similar. So how did we think about it and get started, right? Because I have to hold on to my own morals and say, like, hey, Rich, like I can't just go do really cool innovation work. Like that'll never, support the business. So we have to think very closely about Deloitte's already doing a tremendous amount of AI across all industries. So we know that we have a really, really strong quad 3 business, So I need to be able to support probably 80% of the workloads in quad 3, which then open up me to be able to spend about 20% in my quad 4, my innovation space. So how do we think about prioritizing those? Well, we want to focus on markets that are prone to start pushing the envelope on innovation, right? You can think about those spaces. Probably pharma is one of the best thoughts of that, right? They constantly need to evolve their space because science is incredibly hard. People will always be sick, right? And we need to think about more and more kind of bespoke medicines to make them better. So if you think about that, right, there's a few industries and a few spots that you would tend to pick to actually go and build a business on. So very similar, right? Rich and I, and a lot of others even here in this room, spent a lot of time thinking about, as we're going to business together, just like we've described, where are we going to start? What markets do we focus on? What use cases do we want to attack? And then make sure we have a very structured business that 80% of that could be home runs and wins, and 20% of that should be long shots that we want to take a more systematic approach to doing something novel. But that's okay because we've committed to those ratios and we know that the 80% will support the 20% innovation space.
Yeah, and then as we've been thinking about the horizons of success and how we measure success, we've been very clear, as one of the people that had to go to our management team and our board to get the acquisition approved. We've been very clear from day one that, yes, we'll make financial progress in the near term and along the way, but we're going to measure whether this deal is successful in multiple years, right? So are we building a capability? Are we pushing the broader Deloitte organization more into the transformational space of work? And how is that bigger capability we're growing on top of SFL Scientific, feeding the strategic ambition we have for the kind of work we want to do? And so being very clear, even at the outset of the project, the deal in our case, what those metrics were and how they were going to play out over time, and getting the board on down aligned to them. And quite frankly, the hardest thing now is to keep the practitioners reminded that success isn't going to be determined in the first quarter or the second quarter. We are playing the long game. But once in a while, Mike and team, they're results oriented, so they like to put points on the board more quickly than we necessarily need them to be there.
And the last thing that I'll call out before we break for any questions is we spent a lot of time up front thinking about, as we want to move those novel workloads into production, what does that mean from an IT infrastructure perspective? So we had talked very early on, and Deloitte has committed over the last couple of years and now moving forward to that scaled hybrid environment, right? Getting in various DGX from an on-prem and a hybrid perspective, thinking about new ways from an ML ops and a DevSecOps and a data ops perspective, being at conferences like this, seeing what the innovation space is pushing, because not only do we need to deliver that to our customers and clients, but I want to deliver that internally, right? So we have a lot of time and thought spent with our IT fellows thinking through, as we get more and more sophisticated, how can the workloads in the IT not slow us down, but actually empower us to go faster, right? And that's been a huge focus for us moving forward. So with that, I think we're probably out of time, and maybe a question or so, unless there was any closing remarks.
All good. Thank you for your time. I think maybe a question or two, and then we'll get off the stage and certainly be available for chats afterwards as well.
Yes, sir.
So understand the focus on revenue and dollars. Like large corporations move slowly and deliberately, very often by design. More often than not, we're spending other people's money in return for making them more money. In that space, in the make versus buy equation, when it comes to capabilities like this, how have you found that playing out in terms of, you made the mention of ChatGPT just this week. If I made like a $20 million investment in technology that is now obsolete, say 3 years ago, now do I carry that technical debt forward? Do I deprecate it? Do I therefore just choose to buy technology consulting and services externally instead of burdening my P&L with it? Where does the make versus buy equation fall here?
I can give my perspective first. Strongly believe that if it's something bespoke to your business that you are uniquely going to market with, you should be making it. If you are buying a technology that is the one core thing unique that you're bringing to your customers, well, there's really no reason that they necessarily would need to come to you every single time. You haven't really cornered that space. So the most successful organizations that we have seen is they are always open to buy when the buy is incremental to the business, and they always make when the make is innovative to what they're going to foundationally bring to the market that they are going to be known for best in class in. So that's the way that we've seen it be done very successfully.
I think the only thing I'd add is even if you choose to make, it doesn't mean you can't ask for help, right? And so there's lots of partners out there that would be willing to help build, but then not necessarily own, what's built. And so you got to be thoughtful about when you want to go it fully alone versus seek support. I think with that, we probably got to get off the stage.
I think we have one more question.
Do we? All right.
She wants to ask.
All right.
Come on, then we'll go quick. We promise.
Okay. Speed round.
So the structure that you guys outlined, that was really helpful to see. One thing that I was curious about, especially thinking about, so like the data scientist side, of course, they're kind of playing around with whatever data they get. The other side is growing whatever business and growing whatever audience. And so the question I have is really, who's responsible for avoiding, I guess, bias? And where does that kind of plug in here? Just from, because I can see how naturally it would just fall somewhere in between. So is it, whose responsibility is it to make sure bias is not a part of whatever product? And yeah.
It's both of our responsibilities. And to be fair, it's more than just our responsibilities, right? So real sophisticated organizations are thinking about this from a governance and oversight, a steering committee, whatever you want to call it. It is my responsibility as the technology expert to discuss explicitly why there may be bias in anything that I'm doing algorithmically, data inputs, and so forth. It is Rich's opportunity and responsibility to discuss bias from the end user, the customer, the business's point of view, and the IT. This goes on and on. It's cascading. It's everybody's responsibility collectively, and if you haven't yet, it's my point about early in the room, first of all, if we're not sitting and talking about that foundationally, we will never do it, and it'll become too late, because we'll already have a really cool result, and we'll be like, forget it. That's not the way to do it. So you need to address it up front and understand those biases across the stack, and say, do I want to take that? Is that risk worth it? And if it is, how do we negate and how do we start neglecting that bias such that it's not actually there foundationally? But that's everybody, right?
Well said.
All right.
All right.
Thank you all very
thank
much.
you for your time.